Hey, Buru, Iboya, Ibucheche, everybody in Cyberlands, your favorite Babalao, at least I hope so. Omodu, Modileke coming at you with another great video. This one's live. Why? Because the letter of the year came out, what, almost 2.5 days ago? So, with that, we got to kind of take some things for perspective. So, many of the viewers here have many spiritual houses, right? That at the end of the day, we begin to kind of see that they follow the letter of the year, right? I may have my own perspectives on it, but it's important that if they're following the letter of the year for Cuba, right, that one, I only do the Cuba house for Miguel Febles Patron, right? I understand that in Cuba they do two letters of the year. However, my own reservations, I don't necessarily feel like there should be any other Cuban house, or maybe I'm judging the Cuban house that actually does the other letter of the year, maybe a little too harshly. But I see a lot of political rhetoric in their bylaws and the organization that they are. So I apologize if you thought that I was going to do the letter of the year of any other house, but the one that I have listed up here that you see on the highlight right there, right? So Organization de la Letra de Año de Miguel Febre Patron in Cuba, right? So I want to make sure I made that clear, right? Obviously, I'm here to assist anyone, right? So if you need assistance and maybe understanding the letter of the year for Cuba that's coming out of the other house, you gotta do is shoot me an email. You guys saw my information in the beginning of this video as you guys were logging on. So very important for you guys to kind of just understand that perspective. Like always, right? You gotta do the like, you gotta do like the share, you got to hit the subscribe, right? I think it's very important for us to push the word out to ensure that each and every one of us is doing what we need to do in order to propel our faith, but more importantly, prepare each and every one of you for what's to come in 2025 with this particular letter of the year, right? Yesterday, I had the pleasure of logging in and doing the letter of the year for Miami, right? The one that, for many of us, we should try our best to kind of just hold down, because if you're in the United States, that's probably the one that's closest and more relevant to you. And again, a very trusted house and a very proficient and professional house for sure. So just wanted to make sure that I kind of gave you guys that perspective as kind of time goes on, right? Because I don't want to mislead you all, right? So very important. And with that said, I'm gonna jump to the chat. Just say hi to a couple of people. Hey Lulu, good to see you again. Iburu boy Abucheche. Yeah, Letra from Miami, super helpful, very informative. Thank you for all the work. And Karen, hey, you're welcome. You're welcome. Hey, Mafarafun Steve, Machango, Mafarafun Chango, Mafarafun Ochun, yeah, yeah, lady. Beautiful, right? Beautiful. Hey Robert, hey Buru boy Abucheche. As always, folks, if you guys like the content, again, hit the like, the subscribe, the share, and let's push this out so we can start to get things out there. And again, if you guys need anything from me, you guys see things in the descriptions. You guys can see the video in the beginning, the intro, and you guys can get after it. All right, let's get down to business. Let's understand what we're doing and how we're doing it. Right. So Odun of the year, right? No matter what, for Cuba, right? It's gonna be Indibre, which is Odi Ogbe, right? The first witness was Ogbe Sa, the second witness was Babaiyolgbe, right? And then the prophecy was gonna be Osorbo Buruku Alaye Intori Eggun, which talks about the misfortune along a bad path for the living due to ancestors, right? So, a lot to unpack in that one statement, and we're gonna get to that for sure. Little boy Bucheche Marcella, good to see you on here. And then the governing Orisha, and that's something I didn't necessarily share yesterday with the Miami team, right? But the Miami Letra de Año, right? We had Ogun, right, with Oya, right? And you guys see that in the colors, right? And so, for example, right there, right, you see that that's supposed to be a flag that you're supposed to create, that you're going to put over your door if this is the energy that resides with you in your spiritual house and what your elders dictated. Right, that's in order to ensure that the power of these particular orishas, in this case Odudua and Yewa, are sitting with you, fighting for you, governing along with you in order to ensure that the right advices and the right energy is flowing through your life, through your house, right? And that's very, very important. Remember, everything in Ifa is energy, right? And when we say those things in Ifa, we basically are saying that you are combining energies. Even if you have consecrated items in the house, you're combining it with the governing orishas of the year in order to create a mystical and a magical way of doing business in the physical plane, right? It's very important that we get after that. Hey, Buruboy Bucheche, Marco, Buruboy Bucheche, Odeoni. Okay, so now we're gonna try to get after it a little bit more. Okay, now you're also gonna see that, and let me move in the right direction. Right over here, right over here. Right, you got the bocatero, right? And I'm gonna post these pictures on the YouTube community page in case you guys are wondering, right? And the intent here is to to give you kind of a snapshot, right? A no kidding, a flyer, a one-page handout so you can understand everything. So that's gonna be very important. No, no, Buruboy Bucheche Steve. Yes, there is a lot of letters. So we went from, and not to divert off of this, but we went from having one letter of the year from this particular house, the Commission Organización de la Letra de Año de Miguel Feble Patron, right? To having everybody's taking out letters of the year. It's crazy. But there's some good points to doing that, right? But for the most part, we're not gonna necessarily get on that rant. But you saw that at Bocatero, and I'll put those pictures again on the community tab on YouTube. And it's also posted on Instagram and Facebook. You got them all over the place. But that's an Ebo that is going to be very important for you to go seek about Babalaw's advice. As you begin to listen to this advice and you begin to capture what's the essence of this advice for this Odun of the year, then you're going to begin to understand that, oh, okay, as things begin to become more complicated, as things begin to get marked, these are bosses that you have to do in order to align yourself so that you can avoid the tragedy that is to come, or remove the Osorbo that's like in this prophecy here, right? And remove that out of your path so you don't have to worry about it later. Very important for us to understand the concepts of the Ebo. All right. Now, let's get after it. Let's get after it. So, each and every one of you probably know by now, I like to tell stories. And I like to tell stories that have relevance, right, to the Odun that is reigning. This primary Odun, or the Stoyale in Dibre, or Odi Ogbe, right, has a particular story that I want to share with each and every one of you. So, it's story time for each and every one of you now. Hey, Buruboy Bucheche. All right, Nadia, how are you? From Cleveland, Ohio. I like it. I got kids over there in Cleveland. I got kids over there in Ohio. Pero hey, so let's get to it. Hey, in the story of Endibre, let's go and let's start this out. Once upon a time, no, let's go with this. In the land, right, of Malagun, there was a hunter that was named Edibre, who owed the debt to Oluo Popo, who was Sakwano. All right, better known as, it has a lot of comparisons and is an energy of Babaluaye. We also know as San Lazaro. Right, so long ago, Sakwana, right, had asked Endibre for an itu, right, a guinea fowl, his favorite food, right? But Endibre failed to fulfill the request. So one day Endibre prepared for hunting expedition to Okorelowe, right? He performed in Osode. Okorelowe was a location, right? He did his Ifa divination, which revealed his own name, Endibre, right? So he came out with his own sign. And he was told to perform a sacrifice to avoid being enslaved. But he was too much in a rush, right? And indeed, they ignored warning and he set out anyway. So upon reaching Okure Lowe at nightfall, basically he was looking for shelter, and he found this hollow trunk, right? That was in the woods. So he went ahead and he hid inside of it, right? But inside that hollow trunk, there was an Eggun, right, that was living in there, right? And the Eggun itself trapped Ndibre inside, sealing the hollow part from the outside. And he was carrying the trunk tree, on a journey, right, to Sokwano's home, right, of Okute Lowe. So along the way, right, the Eggun stopped in villages to display the talking tree, right, and it started earning a lot of money because people were like, man, the tree is talking. How awesome is that, right? So while this continued, Oya and Chango overheard, right, a song emanating from the tree trunk. It went, Ini ting ting showe Oya ilu. Indibre, Ini ting ting showe, which basically meant the one singing praises to Oya in the land. Indibre, the one singing praises, right? Because what do we know about Oya? More than she's very much affiliated with the Egguns, the porter of the Egguns, and so that relationship was necessary. So indeed, it was smart to try to chant and call on to Oya. So recognizing Ndibre's voice, right? Oya transformed to Afefe, right? A mighty wind alongside with Chango. The Eggun, terrified of their power, abandoned the tree trunk, right? Oya and Chango freed Ndibre, who immediately offered Mufuribale, right? Basically offer respect to Chango and Oya. Ndibre then performed the overdue Ebo, offering two etus, and traveled with Oya and Chango to Okorelo Way to present them to Oluopopo. Right? And David placed the etu under his bed. That night, Sakwana, guided by the scent, right, consumed the with the etu and left behind a blessing for Ndibre, which is a blessing called Aira Aiku, which is a permanent blessing. So with this, Ndibre returned, to his homeland, accompanied with Oya and Chango, bringing with him the secrets to eradicate leprosy forever, right? So we understand that Babaluaye or Olupopo, you want to refer to it depending on where in the Ifa pantheon of things where he's sitting. Basically, the person who is a raft of a wild loafing, who orders pandemics and illness and sickness, now Ndibre was able to now eradicate leprosy from the world, right? One of the permanent blessings that Ndibre brings. So to finalize the liberation of Ndibre, Chango also performed another ebo, right? Using a large Iatutu, right? And completed an Oberielda, right? For Ndibre. This ensured that Ndibre will never again face enslavement or imprisonment, right? So let's think about this story for a little bit, right? And let's try to get some of the morals of the story. So when we begin to look at the lessons from the story, some of the things that I want you guys to kind of understand is lesson number one, right? The importance of fulfilling obligations. Indeed, his suffering began because he failed to honor the debt from Olu Popo, right? Which would have gave him the permanent ire that he was looking for, the permanent blessing, right? And so in modern times, what do we call that? A neglect to your responsibilities, whether it's personal or professional, right? Can lead to compounding problems. And then when you look at the advice, right, you almost got to say, man, we got to honor our commitments. We got to maintain accountability in all areas of our life. And that's important. The other piece of this was the power of the sacrifice. And David eventually got his freedom, right, and blessings, and achieved, only after he completed the prescribed sacrifices did he get that permanent blessing. But the sacrifice is what transforms the obstacles into the opportunities of growth, right? So basically, we got to embrace the hard work. We got to embrace the humility, right? We got to act and give as a pathway to personal and spiritual fulfillment. And that's something that I think many of us lose sight of. The other thing that this Pataki and Ndibire teaches us is the community and the collaboration. Right? Ndibire's liberation was only possible through Oya and Chango. So what does that mean? That means that intervention, right? Showing the value of community, right? That means you have to build strong, supportive relationships. You got to seek guidance from trusted mentors and allies through difficult times. This is what Ndibire is bringing us, right? Don't think this is just story time. This is for you to apply these lessons learned from this Pataki. Right, but more importantly, something that I want to kind of share with you is that Ndibire was chanting to Oya and Chango, right? It wasn't an immediate, let me sacrifice something to an Orisha in order to get something in return. No, the Orishas understand the needs of the humans, and we complement their blessings, right? Or we may petition for their blessings, sure, but after we sing to them and we honor them and we begin to ensure that we align ourselves. So there's something that I want you guys to think about as you think of Ndibre or the letter of the year that came out of Cuba. The other thing that I would tell you is spiritual alignment. Spiritual alignment, right, is important, right? And Ndibre, neglecting spiritual practices, right, led Ndibre to his initial misfortune, right? Tree trunk man. so so because of that, right, he eventually, right, success came through the realignment with the divine guidance. That means he got out of the trap, right, through the help of Oya and Chango, right? He ended up aligning himself again, and then he found the blessing. So what does that tell you today, modern day today? We got to look at the balance of material pursuit, right, with spiritual growth. He didn't do what he needed to do because he wanted to run off to go hunting. He didn't do what he wanted to do because he was just always in the move, right? Does that sound like many of you? And you need to reflect on that a little bit and kind of make sure that it's resonating because that's the point, right? And you have to engage in your meditation. You got to engage in your prayers and your rituals. You got to make sure you stay attending the things that you have to attend. That's going to be very important. Not to make it a chore, not to make it robotic, but feel it and be one with it so you can get the help of no different than Dibre from Oyan Chango or whatever Orisha. The other thing about Endibre, and for this year that you need to really look at, is going to be the transformation through chaos, through issues, through barriers, right? Endibre's enslavement became a journey of transformation, if you think about it. Endibre was walking this world pretty prematurely, neglecting things, right? And that culminated, right, when he found his alignment and he was able to transform some of those negative barriers. He was able to transform it to freedom and eradicating leprosy in his homeland, right? Forever having a permanent blessing on his hands, right? So when we look at it in 2025, you almost got to look at it as you got to view challenges as opportunities for growth with resilience and faith, right? Adversities, can lead to blessings. You have to just be able to pick it. You got to be able to move forward with it, right? And then here comes the other piece of the puzzle, right? The Eggun's exploitation of El Dibre ultimately led to that Eggun's downfall, right? Because no injustice will ever go unchecked. So integrity and fairness, right, prevailed over the deceit and the greed, right, of the Eggun. So that advice you can apply today. Avoid exploiting others, right? As justice will eventually restore balance. It always does. Right? So we got to fulfill our commitments. We got to seek guidance in crisis. We got to respect our spiritual forces and our practices. We have to embrace adversity as transformation. We have to invest, right, in relationships. We got to stay aligned with integrity. And those are a lot of the key aspects of Endibre. This is the reason why I picked this Pataki for each and every one of you. So you guys have an understanding on where this is going. And Dibre will always serve as a timeless reminder of spiritual alignment, humility, collaborative action, right? Because all those things are essential to overcome life obstacles. By embracing the sacrifice and being resilient, individuals and you and your community right, can transform challenges into all types of enduring blessings. And that is the mission in life for each and every one of you. So if you're following this sign, please heed that advice pretty carefully because that's something that's going to truly, truly guide you and get you where you need to be. All right. Now, let's get down to business. Let's talk Odu because I think that's what each and every one of you now want to hear. You want to hear about the Odu. So in Dibre, when we begin to talk about Dibre, we begin to talk about Ogbe Sa, we begin to talk about Babaiyolgbe, right? We got to begin to look at, and Dibre tells us about the hasty actions that maybe we take from time to time, and we got to be careful, right? That we don't fall or we don't falter, right? To some of those things in this world, right? Endibre is a beautiful sign because Endibre reminds us, and it's a gentle, well, I won't say a gentle reminder, but it's also the power of the creation of the drum. When Endibre created the drum, in order to call upon the power of all the Orishas through the power of Anya, right? Endibre, right, is the sign where the first drum was created by the carpenter, right, of Odudua. So when we begin to kind of peel that energy back, we say, wow, Endibre has a lot of responsibilities. But what's the key of the drum? But you have to play it in order to hear it. And in Dibre, you have to have the spiritual alignment in order for you to truly get to where you want to go. You have to sacrifice, you have to build, you have to work hard, no different than a carpenter. So when you talk about Endibre, those are some of the things that you want to focus on. The other thing about Endibre is that this is an odung of communication, right? An odung of vigilance, an odung of you have to be careful about what you're doing and how you're doing it and how you're saying it. And Libre is a sign where the blessings can come, from the things that you say, but you can also manifest things this year by the things that you say that are negative, right? And you don't want to manifest something. If you say, I hope you get hit by a car, I hope you die, and that happens, karma is a real thing. And Libre will tell you that. And you got to be very cautious about those things while this sign is present. And Dibre, no different than how I mentioned in the Pataki, also kind of underscores the aspects of obligation and responsibility, right? We seek pleasures in Indibre instead of our obligations and responsibilities, which also causes our downfall. And we got to begin to understand that, right? Because those things are important. Because we would rather party, we would rather, do things right that don't necessarily align with our things. But in Libre says that you need to have balance. And Libre says that you, particularly in the community and people who align with this sign, right? You still have to go seek your pleasures. You still got to go dress nice and go do things. No one's saying you can't. But where's the balance in your life? That's Endibre. Endibre, if you notice, I talked about leprosy in the Pataki because Endibre is a sign that marks the smallpox, the chicken pox, right? Skin rashes, irritations, allergies, right? So what is Endibre trying to tell you, right? Endibre is saying that you need to be careful about those things. Maybe traveling out of the country, maybe doing things that might be a little irresponsible, maybe, to the point where you get yourself sick, right? Maybe there's things that you know about yourself that you shouldn't do, but yet you do it anyway. You got to be careful about those things. And because we talk about skin rashes and irritations and things like that, because of the skin, right? Be careful in the summer. 2025, are you going to the beach? You gotta make sure you got that that sun protection. You gotta make sure you have those things, right? So Endibre is already creating that roadmap for you, but Endibre is even deeper than that. And in Dibre, this is not the year to be a criminal. I hate to tell you, right? I would say no years, it's good to be a criminal, but particularly with this in Dibre, because Ifa is known to always help anyone in need, right? Criminals, good people, bad people, it doesn't matter. Ifa does not see, you for your actions, but what they can do for you to transform you to be a better ethical, moral, and legal person, right? But while Indibre is present, be careful because you can commit injustices, right? And you already saw the injustices, what happens, right? The part of the Eggun in Dibre was that the injustice was costly, right? So we got to be careful with that. And in Dibre, you got to be very careful when it comes to money. This is a sign where money needs to be fed, money needs to be put aside, above all things. Because when you do that and you manage your money properly and you look at the things that you need versus the things that you want and you're able to invest, right? Now you're making real money, but you're also gaining the luck from the Orishas and the spiritual alignment within Dibre. And Dibre is a sign where we say, "Ma farafumo lokun e yemaya" all day. You got to respect the ocean. You got to respect the beaches. All right, what does that mean? If you're trying to go deep sea fishing or you're trying to go deep in that water and go swimming or snorkeling somewhere, I would be very cautious with the sign of Endibre present this year, right? Because the ocean may love you so much that it takes you down with it, right? And those currents can be very strong, right? Not because the Orisha doesn't like you, not because you feel that it's a negative presence. No, it's because the alignment is there, right? So and in Dibre, it's going to be very important because the Dibre begins to tell us that there's going to be a lot of pregnancies this year. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to find out that, hey, whoops, I got a baby boy, I got a baby girl, right? And it's going to be important for you to seek the advice, right? Seek the advice of Ifa, right? Through your Bawalao, a Bawalao, or look up my information, get a consultation, because you're going to need to do something to ensure that the baby comes out strong and healthy so that you don't suffer any complications. Or maybe you're already in that phase of complications and you need to do something ASAP. That's going to be something that's very important. And in Dibre, we got to beware of our spouses' families, right? And it goes for both, right? It goes for both pairs. Because then David begins to talk about the animosity between the family, and not just the family, but the family, the friends, right? Even those who are priests and priestesses, the clients, right? And we got to be careful to ensure, because remember what I said earlier? This is an odung of communication. You got to be able to talk everything out, so make sure there's no miscommunication or anything. This is a very big sign. This is a very strong sign that tells us that we have to make sure that if we owe anything to the Orishas, specifically for those of you who've been told, hey, you got to go do a drumming ceremony, a tambol, for the Orishas, go do it. I just told you, in Dibre, the creation of the drumming, right? When we talk about the Egguns that trapped in Dibre, if you got something pending with the Egguns, you need to go do it. Now is not the time to be holding up on that. So let's talk about some of these core themes, right? When I begin to look at in Dibre, right? And then we're going to touch on Ogbe Sa, we're going to talk on Eyiogbe, but I'm going to kind of try to compile them a little bit. When you begin to look at the core lessons for this letter of the year, before I jump into the witnesses of Ogbe Sa and Eyiogbe, right? What is the key lesson? Right? You heard a lot about Indibre. You heard about the Pataki. One of the key lessons is going to be cleansing and realignment with ancestral forces. You saw the the prophecy, by way of the ancestors. Not because the ancestors don't like you, not because they want what's bad for you, not because they want to create hardships, but no, we need to reconcile and appease the ancestral spirits, right? We're failing to address ancestral discord that can result in a significant hardship or blockage, right? So again, that goes back to the advice. If this year you get told do a drumming, this year you get told attend the Egguns, this year you get told that you need to go do something, whether it's go get scratched and palo or whatever you got to go do, you got to do what you got to do with the Egguns. That's important, right? So food for thought as you kind of go through this, right? And then more importantly, how do we apply that today, right? How do you personally do this without the assistance maybe of a spiritual leader, so that way you don't get into this maybe this blockage, right? You got to conduct your rituals. You got to make sure that you're honoring your Egguns. You got to make sure that the sacrifices that that are needed are there. You got to make sure your space is clean and spiritually fortified, Right? Eggun Buruku is a dark Eggun, is an Eggun that's obsessed, right? And they thrive on chaos, they thrive on disorder, they thrive on a dirty home, right? So you got to be careful about those things and remember that. The other thing that's a key theme here, when you be talking about all three of Dibre, Ogbe Sa, Eyiogbe, is strength through community and collaboration, like we saw in the story in the Pataki, right? We saw that the collaboration within communities, particularly, honoring our elders, taking care of the older folks, right? The innocents in our community, strengthening that collective resiliency, right? That's the key because if you disregard some of that communal support, that can lead to isolation, that can lead to failure, and that's something you have to be very careful about. So we got to remember that, right? Engage with the elders, your mentors, your bawalaos, your obaudiates, those folks, so they can better help you. And then when you start talking about the transformation, right? Transformation through enlightenment, right? Because Babaiyolgbe, right? And I said this many times over, even yesterday during the Miami Letra de Año. Yobbe is an odung of light. It's an odung of clarity. It calls for spiritual and practical illumination, the beginning of everything, the rise of the sun, right? All those things need to be applied. We have to approach the challenges in our life with reason and humility. We can't allow the stress and the depression to kick in, the mental health concerns to kick in. We got to focus on long term outcomes. And that's what Yoga begins to tell us about. All right, we got to light those candles. We got to dress in white. We got to bring in that purity as much as possible. And that's what a Yoga tells you. And when you see that in Indibra and you see that in Ogbe Sa, and now you see it in Yobe, you'll see that there's a common theme there, right? Not only are the Egguns asking for alignment, but they're asking for you to begin to align yourself. Eyiogbe is the head. Eyiogbe is a strong sign of Obatala. Eyiogbe is saying you need to find the peace and the humility in your life that you need. And then when we begin to even go further, what are some of these things that we can do, right? Well, the first things first, you need to start to perform more spiritual baths this year. 2025 is going to be a year where you got to start to clean yourself with omiero, right? Osain, right? Herbs that are prepared by a priest or a priestess in order for you to truly start to align yourself, right? And clean yourself. That's going to be big. Making sure that you offer the sacrifices to Eshu and the Egguns that you were supposed to do or you need to do. And if you don't need to do it, I will promise you, you probably just need to go ahead and do it and take care of Eshu and take care of the egg wounds. Because you don't want that problems. You don't want that drama, right? We talked about the clean spaces. We talked about staying organized. We talked about particularly you don't want to amplify negative vibrations, right? I told you everything is energy in Ifa. Everything is energy in this world and in this Yoruba and this Yoruba culture of things. So we got to avoid those dark spaces. Avoid, going down places that might be questionable. Avoid, right, doing things that you shouldn't be doing, right? And which aligns you with more of that negative vibration, right? So when it comes to, let's say, new business ventures. Let's say this year, with this sign with Endibre Ogbe Sa and Eyiogbe, it says that if you have new ventures, right, that you are trying to explore, new business models that you're trying to explore, maybe a new relationship, maybe it's rekindling relationships with your own family, right? A lot of any project, basically, right, is to get a consultation with Ifa and begin to see how we can build that synergy because new ventures in 2025 are going to be profitable for you. New ventures they're going to grow and be a good blessing for you. We got to typically see what's going on with the Egguns and with the Eshu. So basically, you know, without going to a spiritual consultation, you need to be smart on the things that you do. You got to begin to develop detailed plans and remain disciplined. If you're impulsive, it will lead to failure. If you're going too fast, it will lead to failure. You got to be strategic about your actions. In the Odun of Ogbe Sa, and I'm going to talk more on Ogbe Sa and Eyiogbe, Ogbe Sa says you got to do everything complete, right? You got to do everything in time, right? That means no shortcuts. You got to do things the right way. And when it comes to relationships in this Odun of the year, we begin to see that harmony and loyalty are going to be two big things. Now is the time to start to strengthen some of these family bonds, right? And strengthening these family bonds goes beyond just the living, but of course the dead. You got to show gratitude to the living elders, but you got to honor the dead. That's going to be big. For this year, when it comes to the concepts of health and well-being, right? I want you guys to all focus on and share this, right? With we got to focus on our circulatory, right? Our and emotional health. Circulatory meaning the blood flow, right? Are you consuming too much sugar? Are you consuming too much salt? Are you taking the proper nutritions and steps to get yourself, in better shape, right? Because in Indivre Obesa and Eyiogbe, right? You fail to check your own health. You fail to balance a good diet. And those things are going to be essential for you to build up. But then when we start to talk about the mental clarity of things, you got to meditate. You got to practice mindfulness, right? You got to reduce the stress in your life, right? Rituals that you can do is taking the same omiero and making sure it's the right omiero so that you can apply it on your head, right? And wash your head. And for those of you who don't have access to Omiero or somebody who can create you your Omiero, you can always message me again, right? Or go into the description and I sell the Omiero, right? And I'll put the Achan there. If you got your hand of Ifa, your Awofaka, then I gotta pray on it, boom. And I'll give you a dose of what you need in order for you to remedy the things that you need. Because that mental balance is gonna be massive. But more importantly, I talked about a lot of good things. I talked about some so, not so good things. But some of the challenges that are predicted in Indibre, right? Um, and again, I mentioned the communication. I mentioned the mismanagement of relationships, right? The disruption between you and your Egguns, your ancestral spirits, right? But Ogbe Sa tells us something. Ogbe Sa listen, it's not all bad news, right? It's not all bad news. You got to engage, right? You got to engage with others, right? This is going to be a sign of communal expression of communal relationships, right? Getting with your priest and your priestess, and you got to engage with others to achieve harmony, right? And shared prosperity. This is going to be a good year for you to kind of work together as long as you're able to find that peace, that clarity, plan things out the way you're supposed to do it when it's supposed to be done, right? Plan it out properly, of course, right? Maintain a good head because the head takes the body, bang, recipe for success. Makes sense, right? You know, when I begin to look at, the letter of the year, for Cuba, I begin to look at the Odu. Now we're going to go into the witnesses of Ogbe Sa. Ogbe Sa is an interesting thing. You notice I kept telling you, Omiero, 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 you got to take baths, right? And the reason why I say that is because in Ogbe Sa, we talk about the creation of the Orisha or signs pot, right? In that pot, and when we talk about or sign, we're talking about the Orisha of the herbs, right? And those herbs are going to be what cleans you this year. Those herbs are going to be vital for you this year. It's going to be very important for you to always exercise that. But Ogbe Sa tells us that there's possibilities that people are just not going to do what they're supposed to do, which is why I'm warning each and every one of you. Please ensure that your alignment is there. Please ensure that you complete the things you got to complete, right? Because in Ogbe Sa, and a lot of Babalaos will tell you this is a particular sign where we retire, right? When we are casting, Ogbe Sa comes out, and sometimes you gotta refresh the things that we're working with, the divination tools that we're working with, because Ogbe Sa is that strong of a sign. Because Ogbe Sa says that your only friends are really the Orishas and the Egguns. Ogbe Sa begins to tell you that um, you got to be careful of those that were once friends becoming enemies. Ogbe Sa begins to tell us that if we're not careful, we lose our head, right? And Ogbe Sa, the Babalaos know what I'm talking about when we dance the head, right? So Ogbe Sa says you cannot lose your head. Going back to some of those key takeaways I told you earlier about, that you need to find the opportunities in those problem sets or those barriers that you have in your life, right? So then we talk about Ogbe Sa and we begin to say, wow, in Divre, we talked about Egguns. Obesa, we talk about Egguns. Oh, are not necessarily true. I haven't necessarily talked on the Egguns yet on the concept of Obesa. Obesa is a very interesting sign because Obesa is a good tie-in to things that we do with Bovedas, spiritual altars, right? When we talk about just the honoring of ancestors through the spiritualism side of the house, the medium side of the house, right? So when we talk about Obesa, we talk about the crucifix that goes on the Boveda. Let's use that for example. In Obesa, it tells us the actual type of crucifix that you should have on your Boveda. It's not going to be the metal one. No, it's going to be one that's made of an ebony wood, right? Look up an ebony crucifix. That's the one that you want this year on your Boveda, right? And as you begin to kind of see, further, this is gonna be a where we're gonna have to attend those of us who have mothers that have passed away with the sign of Obesa. We may need to see what does our mom want, right? Because in this particular sign, we sacrifice and we give sacrifices to the mother that's deceased, right? Or the father that's deceased. So so we see the tie-in between an Endibre with Eggun issues or Besa. If we don't necessarily take care of things, we have a lot of issues with the Egguns. And we got to make sure that we stay on top of these things. Very important. I think with Endibre or Besa and Eyiogbe, I would advise each and every one of you, for those of you who are capable of doing it, receiving an investigative misa to see who are the Egguns that are walking with you. How do you better align with them so that you can find the success that you need? And Dibre is interesting because we talked about Chango and Oya. And in Dibre, Oya and Chango, I'm sorry, saved in Dibre in the Pataki that I gave you guys. But in Obesa, right? Chango is the one that's saying, hey, I need you to attend me. I have a blessing that's waiting for you, right? And just when you think you're done, he challenges you again with another offering. But the blessing that you're going to get is one that you've always needed, one that was going to align you, right? Important for those who are crowned, Chango, those of you who can go back and are crowned in general, go back to your Ita and Chango. Go back to your Ita and Chango. You know, Obesa says if you're able to maintain your head and maintain the alignment, listen to the advice, Obesa begins to tell you that you have a new career path. You have a new opportunity coming. If you remember what I said earlier in those takeaways, there's some ventures, you know what I mean, that you can salvage, some new ventures that you're going to succeed in. This is your year. You just got to plan. You got to be strategic. You got to execute, and you're going to be successful. And Besat says, listen, you're going to be fine. You know what I mean? And that's something we got to take with us. The other thing about Obesa, I know I said this once and I'm going to say it again because my elders, they never got tired of telling me this on Obesa, right? Hey, don't take shortcuts. Do not take shortcuts. Do everything complete. Don't take shortcuts, right? So again, be strategic, be mindful. The long way is probably the better way when it comes to Obesa. Obesa is another sign where we have to honor the Eguns. We got to honor the Orishas through drumming ceremonies, right? So now you see me talking twice about drumming in Ndibre and Obesa. It's going to be important for us to kind of figure out, if you owe a drumming, you better take care of that. Right. And if you can attend the drumming, even better. Go to the drumming and get the blessings that are there. Those things are gonna be important. Besa has a lot to do with Oya too. So you see in Libre world, Oya Chango, and then when you go to Obesa, it's really Chango and Oya now. Right. And these things begin to resonate. And then when you go to Endibre, you saw Sakwana, and then Obabaluaye, and then in Ogbe Sa, you got Babaluaye as well. Right, so you have a lot of Orishas with very similar temperaments coming down in each sign, which should tell you that we have to be very careful this year. In addition, right, when we talk about Ogbe Sa is a sign where we also got to be worried about our intestinal and our kidney problems, right? Well, besides a sign that says, listen, in order to maintain a nice head, right? And we're going to talk about Eyiogbe later, maintaining a good head, right? And no different than Divre. Do things hasty. Don't do things in a hurry, right? But Ogbe Sa particularly tells us that we got to be very careful of speaking first. When we are in a crowd, when you are with a group of people, do you find yourself being the first one to want to say something? That's something we got to think about, right? We have to try our best to not speak first, right? Listen, right? And take this phrase out of your vocabulary. I know. Take it out of the vocabulary, right? Those things are not gonna necessarily help you. All right, so very important there. All right, before I go into Eyiogbe, let me make sure I'm looking at the chat. I want to make sure that there's nothing I'm missing there. Hey, Boy Bucheche again, Nadia, Steve, Buruboya, Steve, Fred, Buruboya, Johnny, Buruboya. All right, so we begin to kind of, transition now. Now it's a good time for transition. This is a good transition, right? Because now we're gonna talk about the first Odu, number one, Eyiogbe, right? And what is Ifa trying to tell you with Eyiogbe more than, hey, everything has a beginning, right? But in order for things to begin, a lot of times things must end. And Eyiogbe is giving us very similar advices, even from the Miami Odung of the year that I did the live on yesterday, to even with this particular Odung of the year from Cuba. But Eyiogbe is saying, hey, listen, this is not the year to maintain the same garbage or the same, bad influences or bad habits, right, that we've been having from previous years. Time to get out with the old, in with the new, Eyiogbe, right? And you got to look at it no different when Eyiogbe talks about how the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. We want to see the sun rise for you in 2025, right? And we want it to illuminate your whole 2025. And then it can set at the end of 2025 with something brand new, with another letter of the year. And that's what Eyiogbe begins to tell you when I look at Ndibre, when I look at Ogbe Sa, and that's something that we got to remember. Now, Eyiogbe begins to tell you that if you don't use your head properly, if you don't, get away from those stresses, those topics of anxiety, and those things that drive you into to depression, that you're gonna fail. That's very clear, right? You got to look out for your mental clarity. You got to make sure that you're doing those things to get away from particularly some of those negative aspects in your life that are drawing you down, the anchors in your life. And we got to be careful with that. When we look at Eyiogbe, how it complements Ndibre, how it complements Ogbe Sa, right? This is your second witness, right? So it doesn't necessarily have a strong vector, but a very similar message to your Toyale of Ndibre. We got to use our heads. We got to make the proper sacrifices. We got to avoid the stresses, right? Eyiogbe is a sign where the head governs the body, and we got to be able to walk, right? Walk the walk based on where you're going, right? You always got to know where you're going and how you're getting there. That's what Eyiogbe is trying to tell you. Eyiogbe is also another sign that talks a lot about the head cleansings, right? The rogaciones de cabeza, right? And Dibre, you notice that Chango and the Pataki went ahead and sacrificed, right, and Dibre's head so that he will never be enslaved again. In Eyiogbe, you see where the rogacion cabeza, or the head clean, or the head cleansing with the ingredients and the mold, right, and the kind and the hat, right, those things that we call rogaciones, are going to be super important as times transitions, right? So we always got to remember that. But Eyiogbe, very similar to Ogbe Sa. I worry about the folks that are pregnant. I worry about the folks that are not aligning themselves to to making sure that their pregnancies go well and making sure they're doing the things they have to do to ensure that they enter a life into this world properly and they're cleansing their spiritual aura because that's going to be necessary this year. You have multiple aspects of this Odun of the year through three different signs that begin to talk about the aspects of how do we take care of ourselves and how do we what do we do when someone's pregnant, right? So that's going to be something that we got to remember. But Eyiogbe also talks about making sure that we don't necessarily burden ourselves through external influences. Eyiogbe tells us that it's the outside coming in, right, that begins to burden us. And we got to be careful with that. We got to make sure the external forces, right, whether it's family, whether it's friends, doesn't matter, you name it, right, it's not the problem in your life. And just as much as you will dismiss a stranger for being a problem in your life, you may have to have some deep thoughts and reflections on if someone, whether it's friend or family, needs to be cut out, then they need to be cut out. And that's something we also got to kind of always remember to a certain point. And the last point I will leave you with Eyiogbe is it's all based on you. I keep mentioning the head with Eyiogbe. You saw what happened to Ndibre and the Pataki, right? And you begin to kind of tell yourself, if you have positive thinking, if you do what you got to do, right, then guess what? Good things happen. If you have negative thoughts, if you're hasty, if you're not doing things completely, right, all those things are going to begin to lead to negative thoughts, negative processes, negative influences in your life. And that's something you always got to remember. So now let's talk about the no kidding prophecy. Now you understand this prophecy a little bit better. When I say misfortune along a bad path, right, by way of the ancestors, right? What does that mean and what does that resonate to you? And you should actually be able to truly understand that now based on everything that I've said in this particular video. So, I'll take a quick pause. I want to see if there's anything in the chats, right? While I do that, I always want to tell you, look at the description, give me the like, give me the share, get the subscribe. Let's move on. Let's get our life right because this is going to be the year to do that. This is going to be the year to do that. Hey, Buru boy, Bucheche, Adi Dang, Buru boy. Okay. I think for the most part, I think I got everybody answered. I don't see anything additional in the chats. So I'll probably give it another minute. I will stay on this chat for about another 30 seconds. And again, if you guys ever need anything, please hit me up. But more than anything else, right? I will leave you with this kind of a closing affirmation, right? Through the guidance of Ndibre, Ogbe Sa, Eyiogbe, right? Humanity can truly navigate a lot of these difficult, foretold prophecies like this one, the Osorbo Buruku Alaye, Intori Eggun. So by embracing, right, the ancestral wisdom, the respect for the elders, the fostering the community, adhering to the truth and clarity, individuals in society can almost transform any problem into opportunities of growth and abundance. Take care of your spiritual obligations this year because it's going to be more important than anything else. Baba. Okay, let's see. I got a question here. Baba, what type of Egguns are in this Odun? You said what type of Egguns are in this Odun? All types of Egguns are in the Odun, right? Spiritual misas will give you your particular, Egguns. But particularly, you want to make sure that you're honoring Egguns when this particular letter of the year, particularly those who have deceased mothers and fathers, right? The Eggun Buruku that I talked about before, the obsessed spirit, right? Or that dark spirit, that dark energy, right? Can enter a person's life, absolutely. Which is why we got to take precautions. We got to take care of our heads and our spiritual baths and do the ebos and listen to the advice and everything that was said in this video. So hopefully that helps you out, Fred, with your question, if that makes sense. Okay. All right. Hey, with that said, hey, Iburu, Iboya, Ibucheche, Cyberland, your favorite Bawalao, checking out, like, subscribe, share. That's for my boy David. Iburu, Iboya, Ibucheche.